I really like Ecco the Dolphin. I like pretty much all of Ecco the Dolphin, and I especially like its climax, which a lot of people seem to rag on because it's, well, really, really hard. And while that's justifiable in a few points that are genuinely pretty cheap, I think it subverts the player's expectations in an actually pretty ingenious way, and I think it deserves way more credit than it gets. I like that the game spends so much time building up the Vortex in your imaginations, and then when you finally get to them, they're just as horrifying, if not more so, than you actually imagined. We're going to start at Darkwater, which is the last and probably toughest of the game's standard levels, before it just goes completely off the rails. There's a lot of side paths here, but none of them really contain anything important. Those shells there will crush you, and they're what make this level really tough later on. There's two more shells here that I just tend to dash through. Sometimes they kill me, but slowing down. The level's really short if you're quick, so I don't really mind it too much. If you shoot those crystals, then in addition to touching them, then you can get invincibility, which is really nice. Right here's a shortcut. It's kind of hard to get through there, but if you do, then you can skip that barrier glyph and skip probably the hardest part of the level and go right to the boss, which kind of castrates the whole level, really, although the boss is still really tough. It's not really clear initially what you're supposed to do here. You're supposed to hit 4 of the guy's orbs of the same color without hitting a different one. You can't stay still because if you do, then he will just zap you with lightning. So there we go. And I really like this teleportation music. They play it whenever you travel through time. Alright, and now we're in the deep water, I think, and this is a pretty easy part, so I'm just going to fast forward through it because I'm on a clock here. Next, we're going to go see the Asterite, who charged us with finding his missing orb in the past, so that he can be at full power again. And we did so by stealing an orb from his past self, meaning we're probably the source of his missing orb in the first place. Now he's just going to give us some extra powers, regenerating health, infinite oxygen, and more powerful sonar. And all that's weird because Ecco, up until now, has been very focused on carefully managing your health and especially your oxygen supply throughout the very large labyrinthine levels. Basically, this means that Ecco is turning into a very different sort of game, one more focused on auto-scrolling, obstacle avoidance, as opposed to resource management and just approaching things carefully and slowly. I think that's a really interesting way to handle a climax, but first we need to go through Atlantis. And now we get to listen to some more lovely tunes as we travel back in time to the moment when Ecco's pod was taken by the Vortex at the very beginning of the game. So we're going back to the home bay. Some of the dialogue here actually implies that you may have one of the people you've talked to was yourself in the very beginning of the game. So now we arrive. Title screen music starts playing, bringing everything around full circle. Talk to some of the dolphins, and then confront the Vortex. What do you have to say? There's a little hint telling you what you're supposed to do, just like at the start of the game. I love games that are symmetrical like this and how they approach their endings. Alright, well, let's go for it. Now we actually know what's happening, unlike at the start of the game. Alright, thus begins the tube. Now this level I think looks really cool, but I don't really like it that much. A lot of it's very focused on just straight memorization, and it's not as interesting as what comes afterwards. One touch I do like is how the background is aligned differently on the left than on the right, and it kind of makes the whole level feel a little bit off kilter. Like, I genuinely thought that the level was tilted slightly to the right, but it's not. It's straight. But just because there's stars on the left and it's everything shifted a little to the right, it makes the whole thing feel a little off, which fits with kind of the mood it's trying to evoke here, I think. All right, we got to the really boring part of the tube where we just sit here and watch as shoot things go by. You count those ones on the left. Once 3 of them go by, then you go back to the left and you move over to the left to dodge the thing. It feels kind of like cheesing the level, and the fact that you have to do that to beat it, I don't really care for. But it's short and it's really not that hard, so I don't care too much. What comes next is way more interesting. Alright, I really like the color palette here too. The greens and browns stand in such really stark contrast to the rest of the game, which is just so pretty to look at. You'll also notice here that we don't have to do the death sonar dash sonar thing like in the previous games, which makes shooting the enemies way easier. All you have to do is press the sonar button. And you see that my health's getting pretty low here, and I think it's part of it's just kind of luck at this point. It's I don't care much for this level, but it goes by quickly, so I don't really mind too much. It's almost at the end here. We're just doing lots of standing and shooting as the same obstacles go by. They just couldn't do much interesting when it's moving this fast, so they just fling lightning and enemies at you, hoping to just... I don't know, I never die at this part of the level, so I don't really know what they're... The lightning here is actually the same as the lightning that the asteroid flings at you if you stand still during his fight and let him just shoot you. Alright, and that's the end. Alright, onward to the machine. Alright, I have a confession. I absolutely, unhealthily love the machine. It is a 7-minute long auto-scrolling level with no checkpoints and 1 enemy type and 1 other hazard besides the scrolling screen, which can crush you. And I love it. I love its weird green background. I love its ear-grating, bizarre music. I love those green things that shoot at you. I mean, think about it. 30 seconds into the level, and you've already seen everything that this game is going to throw at you in this level, but it still manages to keep switching it up with just those 3 simple things: the scrolling, the bullets in the walls, and the Vortex minions. And it keeps switching it up the whole level, and it never gets repetitive. And I think that's kind of amazing. I think it's really elegant and cool, and yes, there are a few genuinely cheap moments, but there's nothing like the tube, where it's just straight memorization. Yeah, I've played this thing so many times at this point. I've probably spent more time on it than the rest of the game combined, and at this point it's basically just relaxing to me. It's almost meditative just to sit down and take a few runs at the machine. I don't know what makes it so perversely compelling to me, but I'm pretty sure I am basically alone in the world in thinking so. 6 or 7 months ago, I actually tried to make a game that's just in this style. That was just like a 5 or 6 minute long game where you just run through an auto-scrolling game like this. And the first thing I did was add like 4 or 5 enemy types and some electricity that shoots out of the walls, and that's not what makes the machine so brilliant. What makes the machine brilliant is that it's so nauseatingly simple and still kills you over and over and over again. You'll notice that I died 32 times trying to get this video done. I died probably 100 more when I was actually playing the game for the first time. And while that seems like this about the same amount of time I spent on Dark Water takes like a minute to beat. This takes 7, and I usually get pretty far at this point. I like this segment here. It's just kind of some dead space, but it's kind of in the middle of the level, so it's a nice breather as you kind of can prepare yourself for the rest of it before things get really kind of claustrophobic and a little speedier. I mean, I'm just in awe that they were able to take all of the isolation and oppressiveness and difficulty of the rest of Ecco the Dolphin and just put it all together into this big, brutal, long level that just perfectly encapsulates everything it's been building up towards. yes, it's really hard, and yes, there aren't any checkpoints, but there aren't any checkpoints in the rest of Ecco the Dolphin. If you have gotten through everything leading up to this, then you can beat the machine. And it only really works because the Vortex are such cool villains. I mean, especially when we get to the final boss. But, like, they're a genuinely Lovecraftian antagonist, and I love that they aren't introduced until halfway through the game. When you get to the Atlantean library and they explain what the Vortex are and what they've been doing. I think that's really cool. And that the game doesn't reveal its plot until like halfway through. And the fact that yes, it's basically just rescuing the princess from the castle, only in this case it's the pod, and instead of castle it's the alien hive mind. Yes, it's that basic plot, but the plot doesn't matter. It's the execution, and the execution is incredible. The Vortex are so cool, and yeah, they steal a lot from H.R. Geiger, but we just passed one of the genuinely dickish moments of the game where we're basically just given a 50-50 shot at making it. And yeah, that's probably just bad game design, but it still fits with what the machine is. It's this awful, unfair thing. And it's glorious, and I love it. And I'm just really enthusiastic all of a sudden, because I love Ecco the Dolphin so much. And there's a lot wrong with it. I mean, mostly just like this. I mean, the sound effects are pretty grating, and there's a bunch of block puzzles, and the camera can be kind of nauseating if you're sensitive to that sort of thing. But this game is just such a razor-sharp, fine-tuned instrument in creating this perfect sort of effect in the player. Just this alienating, ugly loneliness. And there's a lot of games that try to do stuff like that. Like, one of my favorite shmup series is R-Type, and it's kind of the same thing in a lot of ways. But Ecco contrasts it with the big, beautiful oceans, and then finally contrast that with this awful machine. And it's just so magical and terrifying. And I love it. I love it, I love it, I love it, I love it. It's my favorite sort of art house game, where all the arty visuals and thematics are intrinsically tied in the core gameplay, and nowhere else in Ecco is that as best exemplified as in the machine. Ecco was designed and directed by a guy named Ed Annunziata, and he's done a whole number of other interesting games that kind of fit with the same kind of mood. One of the famous ones is Shotgun the Forever Man, and I haven't actually played it much, but I've looked into it a good bit, and it's pretty much trying to evoke the same mood as Ecco, but it's a lot less subtle in how it goes about it, in that it's literally about a guy who can't die and is alone and everything's awful and dreary. But Ecco captures that in such a subtler way by just with being the dolphin in the ocean and leading it into that kind of atmosphere. It's subtle and interesting in a way that I don't really see too often in games nowadays. And it's such a cohesive vision that even if it's not that polished, it's still just amazing to me. And now we're gonna fight the final boss. I guess one problem, I did say that there are parts of this game that are genuinely cheap at this part, and the way that the US European Mega Drive version of Ecco break their own rules just to make this fight harder is kind of obnoxious. You lose your regenerating health in this fight for no good reason, and if you die, then you go back to the start of the machine. And that's probably pushing it too far, I think. In the Sega CD version, you keep your regenerating health, and I'm pretty sure if you die, then you just restart the fight, unless you get eaten, in which case you go back to the machine, which I think is fair. On the Japanese version, if you die on the fight, then you go back to you just stay on the fight, unless you get eaten, in which case you go to a separate level called the stomach. And if you beat that, then you go back to the fight, and if you don't, then you have to go back to the machine. The fight itself is pretty simple. It's just a matter of not getting eaten and getting into a rhythm. And you have to knock off his jaw 3 times here, which really isn't that tough. It's just hard to, you just don't want to screw up. And then you just have to hit him 5 times in the head, which can be tough because hitting him in the head leaves you at risk for damage. I feel like a lot of people are probably put off from finishing the game just because this boss is so unforgiving and just its death penalty. But if you practice it beforehand with save states or passwords, then it really isn't that much of a stretch to beat the boss and the machine in one go. I got to the boss 3 times legitimately and beat her on the 3rd try, after just practicing her a little bit with save states. I think I actually only took like 45 extra minutes after beating the boss separately and the machine before I beat them in one go in my 1st try. I'm about out of time, so I'm going to cut the commentary here and let you watch the ending. Thank you so much for watching. See you next week. Oh, sure, now